What's going on, everyone? So we got some updates in regards to Gary Trent Jr., who is a guy that the Lakers are interested in targeting in free agency, not for a trade, but to actually sign him. So after multiple unsuccessful negotiations with Gary Trent Jr., the Toronto Raptors appeared prepared to move on from the guard later this week, per JLU 1050, with one source saying he would be lucky to make the mid-level exception. Multiple league sources believe the Raptors are prepared to move on from the 25-year-old guard. Per a source, the Raptors were willing to bring the sharpshooter back at an annual salary of around $15 million when the negotiation window opened last month, but Trent's camp was looking for a raise on the $18.5 million he made last season. Something in the $25 million range was believed to be the ask. Now, with the market drying up, one league insider suggests Trent would be lucky to get the mid-level exception valued at $12.5 million. Few reports have him linked to the Lakers, where it's possible he could earn only half of that. So Gary Trent Jr. looks like, he wanted the bag. Toronto was like, we don't want to give you the bag, which kind of makes sense. I mean, the Raptors are clearly headed for a rebuild, right? They liked Gary Trent Jr. They thought he was a big piece of the future, but they kind of prolonged their rebuild process, right? I mean, several years there was talks about like, hey, they need to trade OG, they need to trade Pascal Siakam, the direction they're heading isn't working, and yet they just kind of stuck with it until they decided, okay, fine, we'll finally trade Pascal Siakam, boom. Then it's like, okay, now we'll trade OG Anunoby, boom. And now it's like, well, Gary Trent, are you really planning on paying him 25 plus million, or are you better off just letting him go, letting him walk? And you had to pay, like Quickly and several other these guys coming up. It just made sense that he'd kind of be the odd man out, and it clear as day that that's the case, right? And now Gary Trent Jr., he's a guy that's been linked to the Lakers. There doesn't really seem to be a huge market for Gary Trent at the moment. And obviously it's still very early. Teams are still trying to figure out, like, what are they doing on the trade front, right? The Lakers are still in that category, right? Like, they're still in negotiations. They're still having talks about trying to trade for player X, Y, Z, mostly wings. Right now you hear the conversations about guys like Kyle Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Bruce Brown. Like, these guys are guys that the Lakers are targeting via trade. Now, also, Gary Trent, his value's kind of gone down, right? I mean, they tried to trade him on several occasions. The Lakers almost had him, like, twice, right? Like, they had a deal basically done. It was a 3-team deal between the Toronto Raptors, the Knicks, and the Lakers, and the Knicks ended up basically ruining the trade because they wanted to get more when they were getting ready to finalize it. And so Gary Trent ended up sticking around with the Toronto Raptors, picked up player option, and there was still several times in which the Lakers were trying to go and trade for Gary Trent. But there was conversations about, like, Raptors should have traded Gary Trent a few years ago. I mean, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. Like, Gary Trent, like, led the league in 30-point games. Like, he was looked at as like, oh man, he's coming. And I think he was like 22, 23 at the time. And since then, he's kind of regressed, not necessarily in the skill set manner, right? Like, he's still that legit 3-and-D, like 2-guard, small forward type player who can play defense, defend multiple positions, go and get his own shot, as well as, knock down the open three. So there is value in a guy like Gary Trent, but with the Raptors, again, it was like they were in this kind of like weird influx, and then he started getting less playing time, and then it just kind of was like the Raptors didn't know what to do. So I think a lot of it was just frustration, and I think a lot of it is just Gary Trent's value is low right now. Teams are kind of like, what do we need to bring him in for? And most of the teams already have a guy like a Gary Trent, or they have that young guy that they're developing, right? So, like, how many teams need essentially another 2-guard, maybe slightly undersized 3-guard? There's not very many, if any. But even the Lakers, you could argue, currently don't really need a Gary Trent Jr. Now, I think Gary Trent is, would be very welcoming in just his 3-point shooting, his defense. We could definitely use a 3-and-D guy to his standard, but right now, as it stands, like no pun intended, right? You look at the roster, it's like we're flushed right now with guards, right? Like you have D'Lo and Reeves still. Then you have Max Christie, who is supposed to get a more significant opportunity. And, Max Christie is basically a Gary Trent, right? Shoots 40% on the catch and shoot three. He's a guy that can put the ball on the deck, plays defense, gets after it. I actually think Max Christie is better defensively than Gary Trent Jr. is, or at least he's shown the capability of potentially being better. But look, like if you told me, hey, we could have two Max Christies on the roster, like I would do that all day. But the Lakers would have to make other moves. And there is this like growing sense and kind of like murmurs and rumors out there that the Lakers, that Gary Trent is kind of waiting on the Lakers, that him and Spencer Dinwiddie, which are the two guys that, multiple articles have came out since that, like, hey, those are the two guys that the Lakers are targeting via free agency. But again, that would only make sense if the Lakers make a trade. You're not bringing in Spencer Dinwiddie back, and you're not bringing in, Gary Trent Jr. unless you make a move. Because one, your roster is full, and two, you're kind of flush with guards. But if the Lakers do go pull off a trade for, say, a Jeremy Grant or a Cam Johnson, and they unload D'Angelo Russell, and they, unload a Gabe Vincent, and you start getting rid of guys, all of a sudden it becomes like, okay, well, now you have the need for another guard. Now you have the need for another piece, right? Because also Dalton Connect, you have Dalton Connect, but there's also not a guarantee that he's ready. Right? There's also a guarantee that he, like, how much of an impact is he going to have? A guy like Gary Trent is more likely to have a bigger impact than a Dalton Connect, who is a first-year player who, doesn't have the experience, that doesn't have the understanding rest. I'm not saying Dalton Connect can't still be a real piece, but if you can get a Gary Trent, I think you get Gary Trent. And then, again, worst case, you could have like Max Christie start or Trent start and then have the other come off the bench. So I definitely think if the Lakers are to kind of make that first move and clear up some space, clear up some spots, that's where I think Gary Trent makes a lot of sense, right? Because he can still play the three. Again, you wouldn't want him playing the three against like Denver and Michael Porter Jr., but on most nights, you could probably get away with him slotting as your three and play the 3-and-D style. And again, I don't know if you're starting him. It depends on what the roster shakeup looks like, but even as just like an undervalued piece, because he's worth more than, he's probably in that like 15 to 18 million range. I don't think he's worth 25 million, but definitely that 15 to 18 range, I do think is his value. And if you can get him on a taxpayer mid-level, then you got him a lot more than what his value is. I mean, he's going to outperform that contract tenfold. But also, Gary Trent makes sense as to why he'd want to go to the Lakers. The Lakers have had this history and have shown that, like, hey, you're being undervalued, or you believe you're being undervalued, come to the Lakers. Raise your value. So Gary Trent, he might be looking at it as like, man, if I could go to the Lakers, yeah, it would suck. I'd take a taxpayer mid-level. I make $5 million or whatever for a season. But after that, I could probably go and raise my value and get paid. Maybe I can get $15 million. And there's going to be other teams that have cap space next season. It was one of the reasons why there were reports that DeMar might just sign a 1-year deal so that way he could go into free agency in 2025, because there's several other teams that will have more cap space. But then ultimately DeMar was able to get a sign and trade done to get the price that he wanted. So Gary Trent could potentially look at it the same way and go, okay, kind of bite the bullet, take a discount, and then end up going, kind of like the Malik Monk route, right? Like Malik Monk was being offered contracts or whatever, but then he was like, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to go ball out with the Lakers, use the Lakers brand, use the Lakers spotlight to really kind of highlight my skill set. And then if it works, then I get the bag. And that's what happened, right? So Gary Trent, again, if the Lakers do make some key moves and he can go to the Lakers And if he can play a real pivotal role and the Lakers have success, and I'm not even talking about necessarily winning a championship or anything like that, but the Lakers are good and Gary Trent is part of the reason, even as like the 7th, 8th guy, then that now has value and other teams may see that and go, hey, you know what? Let's go get Gary Trent. If he averages even like 12 off the bench, let's say, because this is a guy that's averaged anywhere from 15 to 18. So like, let's say, he plays and he gets 12 a game. Like teams might look at that and go, man, he's playing good defense, giving you 12 a game, right? As like the 8th guy on the Lakers. Like, what does he look like as like our 3rd guy here and plays a significant role? And then him still being 25, he's still young enough to where there's upside and potential there. And if he's great for the Lakers, maybe the Lakers even keep him around. Maybe the Lakers even look to keep him. And, again, you can't have too many 3-and-D guards and wings. Right, so if you can get a Jeremy Grant, you can get a Gary Trent Jr., which Gary Trent is proven, right? So, like, even if Max Christie, like, let's say, what happens if Max Christie isn't ready to take that stride? The idea is that there is, and the idea was that, like, man, if Darvin Ham played him more last year, he'd be a lot farther along. But the problem is Darvin Ham didn't play him last year, and on top of that, it's like, okay, does he need another year or two? He's also 21 and hasn't really gotten the significant minutes in time. So to get a guy like Gary Trent to kind of give you a little bit of insurance, I'm not saying you don't play Max Christie, but I'm saying like now you're not so heavily reliant on Max Christie. Right now, it's not like, well, Max Christie is basically our only backup too outside of Dalton Connect, right? Like, and it's like now you're in a position where you could get a guy in Gary Trent who he can slot in, he can play the minutes, he can hit the shots, he can create a little bit for himself, create a little bit for others, and just be a valuable piece on the Lakers. So I like the idea of Gary Trent. I like the idea a lot of Gary Trent. He's a guy that I've wanted on the Lakers for years. And hopefully the Lakers will be able to work it out. But still a lot of dominoes that have to fall first. And it's also possible that somebody just, throws him some money and now they're in good shape. So we'll see. Time will tell. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. Pass a question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you like the idea of Gary Trent Jr. on the Lakers? Do you think, like, no, like we already got too much? Again, obviously, it's predicated on trades because the Lakers couldn't even sign him right now, even if they wanted to. So they have to, we're at least going to get, in consolidated trade. We're at least going to unload several guys, and we'll see how that ends up playing out. But, even if, like, say you unload Wood and Reddish, you don't really solve your guard problem, right? Like, so Gary Trent doesn't really make sense, neither does Spencer Dinwiddie. But again, like, let's say you go and you trade for Jeremy Grant, or let's say Cam Johnson, because the Nets supposedly want D'Lo, right? So, if you go and you trade D'Lo and something else for, Gary Trent Jr., well, now it's like, okay, well, now you kind of have this void that you could fill with Gary Trent. Need a point guard, okay, here's Spencer Dinwiddie, and now you're in good shape. So, anyway, again, how you feel, whatever your thoughts are, let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot, so we enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.